I see you girls are not seeing exactly eye to eye this morning.
I just told her firmly that she'll not be allowed to leave the ranch again until the mine is sold.
Before Dale Evans became the woman America dressed up as on Halloween and praised on Sunday mornings, she was a woman fighting through storms she never asked for. Her life looked shiny on posters, but the real story lived in the moments nobody clapped for. The losses that hit like punches, the choices that haunted her, and the pain she kept swallowing just to get through another day beside Roy Rogers. But when you peel back the legend, you can't help wondering, what was she trying so hard to outrun? Which heartbreak carved itself so deeply into her life that it never loosened its grip? And why does her story feel less like a fairy tale and more like a quiet cry the world never really heard? Join us today as we step past the smiles, past the songs, past the legend itself, and uncover the heartbreaking life and death of Dale Evans, the hidden pain behind the woman America loved. Before Dale Evans ever stepped into the limelight beside Roy Rogers, her story was already carrying the kind of weight that leaves quiet bruises on a life. She entered the world as Frances Octavia Smith, born on October 31, 1912, in Uvalde, Texas. A tiny girl wrapped in the kind of small-town beginnings that never warned her how hard the road ahead would hit. She grew up in Italy, Texas, where her voice first found its way into the world at just 3 years old, rising inside a Baptist church that had no idea it was listening to a future icon. But even then, the ground under her life never stayed steady for long. By 9, she was living with her maternal aunt and Dr. L.D. Massey in Osceola, Arkansas. She ended up with them again at 11 for medical treatment. To Dale, they weren't distant relatives. She described them as the people who felt like her second parents, the ones who stepped in when the storms in her home life started picking up speed. Her early years carried a kind of chaos that most adults never face, and she was still just a child trying to grow up inside it. At 14, an age where most girls are still figuring out the world, she ran off and married Thomas F. Fox. By 15, she was holding a newborn son, Tom Fox Jr., in her arms, and by 16, she was abandoned, standing alone in Memphis with a baby on her hip and a future that looked nothing like the dreams she once had. She scraped her way forward the only way she could. She took business courses. She worked at a bus company, then an insurance agency. Her days were spent chasing stability, and her nights were spent holding onto a voice that refused to die. Then one day, her luck changed. Her boss overheard her singing, and that moment cracked open a path she didn't even know was waiting. Memphis radio stations WMC and WREC put her behind the microphone where she sang and played piano. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was hers, and it carried her all the way to Chicago. The city didn't greet her with red carpets, though. It handed her a diagnosis of malnutrition. She was broke, hungry, and trying to survive in a city that didn't care who she was. Still, she kept moving. By 1929, that first young marriage was over. She took the name Dale Evans while working at WS in Louisville in the early 1930s. A station manager pushed her towards something short, catchy, and easy for announcers to say. Before that, she had tried on other names: Frances Fox, Marion Lee, searching for something that fit. But Dale Evans stuck, and soon it became the name everyone knew, never guessing the pain she had buried beneath it. Dale Evans, the Hollywood legend built on secrets, survival, and a hidden son. Dale didn't walk into fame. She fought her way into it. She started as a secretary at a radio station, singing on the side whenever they'd let her. But her voice didn't stay tucked into a side job for long. She built a strong career in jazz, swing, and big band music, the kind of smooth, rich sound that finally earned her a screen test and a contract with 20th Century Fox. She even got national radio attention as the featured singer on The Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy Show. A big step for a woman who once couldn't afford a decent meal. From 1936 to 1938, she sang her way across Texas airwaves on Dallas station WFAA, perfecting the sound that would eventually make her Hollywood's favorite cowgirl. But while her career climbed, her personal life stayed complicated. She went through 2 more marriages, first to August Wayne Johns from 1929 to 1935, then to arranger Robert Dale Butts from 1937 to 1946. Both marriages ended. Neither brought her more children. And through it all, the studios kept weaving their own version of her life. When she arrived at 20th Century Fox, the studio didn't just promote her, they rewrote her story. Publicly, they presented her as the unmarried, devoted sister supporting a teenage brother named Tommy. But Tommy wasn't her brother. He was her son, Tom Fox Jr., the child she'd had at 15, and the one the world didn't even know belonged to her. That lie followed her through her years at the studio, through her marriage to Butts, and even into the moment she stepped into her role as Roy Rogers' cowgirl co-star at Republic Studios. Dale was becoming the woman America adored, the smiling, steady, wholesome queen of the West, while hiding a truth heavy enough to break anyone who had to carry it alone. Before the world turned her into a legend, life had already made her into someone who knew loss, betrayal, reinvention, and survival far too early. But to understand the woman the world would one day love, you have to go back to where the fractures first appeared. The heartbreaks, reinventions, and hidden battles Dale Evans faced. At 14, Dale was still a girl standing on the edge of her own life when she crossed paths with Thomas F. Fox. There was nothing glamorous about the moment, just a crowded room, too much noise, and a boy who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Something shifted inside her before she even understood what it meant. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of young, reckless pull that swallows 2 teenagers before they realize they're in too deep. Within months, that fast-burning attraction turned into a decision she would spend years untangling. They married in 1927, slipping their real ages under the rug just to make it happen. Her at 14, him at 17. A year later, they were holding a baby boy, Thomas F. Fox Jr. And for a brief, fragile moment, the world let them pretend they were building something solid. But life doesn't care about fairy tales built on shaky ground. By 1929, the cracks split wide open. Thomas walked out on Dale, claiming he wasn't ready for a wife and newborn, as if she had been ready at 14. He had already abandoned her twice before, but the final time cut the deepest. He didn't stop to think about the girl he was leaving behind, standing in Memphis with their infant son and a future that looked nothing like the one she had been promised. That choice wasn't just a breakup, it was a blow that forced Dale to grow up long before she should have. But Dale didn't curl up under the weight of it. She refused. She picked up the scattered pieces of her life and pressed forward with a determination that was bigger than her age. Living in Memphis, she chased her music dreams with everything she had. The pay from radio stations wasn't enough to keep a roof over her head, so she worked wherever she could. Bus company, insurance agency, business classes squeezed in between survival. She wasn't just getting by, she was clawing her way toward a life she believed she deserved. And then, fate cracked open a small window. Her boss at the insurance agency overheard her humming at her desk, completely unaware that her voice was about to change her life. It stopped him in his tracks. He pushed her to go after her talent and arranged for her to sing on Memphis stations WMC and REC. It was her first real step into the world she had dreamed of, and once she got that taste, she refused to let go. By 1930, she was performing regularly, singing, playing piano, soaking up every second of the life she was fighting for. But Memphis could only take her so far. Her ambition was too big for small rooms and local applause. So she took a risk and headed to Chicago, hungry for more. Chicago didn't welcome her with open arms. Within days, a doctor diagnosed her with acute malnutrition. She was broke, exhausted, and trying to survive in a city that didn't know her name. But she didn't stop. She recovered, found work, and kept pushing. But the road pulled her somewhere else first. Dale and Tommy moved to Louisville, where Wuss hired her as a singer. It was there that her name changed for the last time. She had been Frances Fox, then Marion Lee. But the station manager wanted something sharper, something that would stick. And just like that, she became Dale Evans. She didn't know it yet, but that name would one day echo across America. But before fame came knocking, misery beat it to the door. Her marriage to August Wayne Johns, the man she had married in 1929 after her heartbreak, began to rot from the inside. In 1936, they divorced. No children came from that union. It spared her one layer of chaos, but not the emotional blow. And that wasn't the only hit she took that year. Her son Tommy fell seriously ill. With no family support in Chicago, Dale packed up and headed back to Dallas. Her parents were there, and she needed them. Tommy stayed in Italy, Texas, recovering under their care, while Dale worked at WFAA in Dallas, trying to balance motherhood, survival, and ambition without losing herself in the process. In Dallas, the universe handed her a small spark of luck. She crossed paths once again with pianist and orchestra leader Robert Dale Butts, someone she had worked with before. Their friendship deepened into something warm, something hopeful. Dale reached for love again, and in 1937 she married him. After the wedding, Chicago called them back. Robert landed a job at an NBC affiliate, and Dale found more stages to conquer. She slipped into jazz, swing, and big band music with ease, her voice weaving through smoky rooms and polished studios. She landed a major opportunity when she became the featured singer for the Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy Show. A rising star in real time. But, as always, timing had its own agenda. She sang with the Anson Weeks Orchestra, joining them for a year-long national tour that stretched her talent and opened doors. For 8 weeks, she lived and breathed Los Angeles, hoping to catch her big break. But luck didn't turn her way. Not yet. That break finally came when Hollywood agent Joe Rivkin spotted her potential. He brought her in to audition for Holiday Inn, a film starring Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire. It was the kind of opportunity people prayed for, but she didn't land the part. It stung, but Dale wasn't the type to let one moment define her. Not when she had survived everything else. Her determination, however, didn't go unnoticed. Even though she didn't win the role, 20th Century Fox signed her anyway. But the studio didn't just want her talent. They wanted her story. So they rewrote it. They shaved 7 years off her age. They turned her into the plucky, unmarried sister supporting a teenage brother. But that boy wasn't her brother. He was her son. The world adored the lie, and Dale carried that weight in silence while smiling for cameras that had no idea what they were looking at. For years, she lived split between truth and performance, a young mother pretending she wasn't one, a survivor pretending nothing hurt, a rising star carrying the shame Hollywood forced onto her shoulders. And then, in 1943, everything shifted. She landed 2 films, The Cowboy and the Senorita and Hollywood Canteen, 2 roles, 2 doors opening. One of them led her straight into the path of the man who would rewrite the rest of her life, Roy Rogers. By 1945, the dust had barely settled on her divorce from Robert when life nudged Dale Evans into a chapter she wasn't ready for but couldn't avoid. It was the part of her story that would lift her higher than she had ever dreamed and break her in ways she never saw coming. It was the chapter that would turn her from a survivor with a microphone into an American legend. Meeting the love of her life. Before the world tied their names together like a single breath, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans existed on opposite sides of their dreams. He was already the king of the cowboys, the man whose smile sold hope to a country desperate for it. She was the woman Hollywood kept trying to remold, pushing her into whatever box they thought would sell. But long before they ever touched hands on a movie set, their paths crossed quietly, almost forgettably in a recording studio. Roy had been in the booth with the Sons of the Pioneers, laying down tracks the way only they could. Dale, still clawing her way toward a real shot, happened to be in the same building. She remembered him because everyone knew the Sons of the Pioneers. He didn't remember her because she was still fighting for a place on the map. In any other life, that moment might have dissolved into nothing. But fate wasn't done. Years later, Dale walked onto the set of The Cowboy and the Senorita, a film she never expected would change her entire world. She wasn't chasing the West. She still carried Broadway dreams in her pocket, hoping a good performance would catapult her onto a bigger stage. But the minute she and Roy shared the screen, something clicked. Not just chemistry, something deeper, quieter, the kind of pull you feel before you can explain it. Hollywood felt it too. After that first film, the studio paired them up again, and again, and again. 7 more pictures followed because audiences didn't just like them. They believed in them. They lit up the screen with a warmth that wasn't staged. It was real. Even before their hearts caught up to it, people could sense the way they fit together. Behind the cameras, they built a friendship that didn't ask for anything. 2 people who had been bruised by life in different ways found something steady in each other, a peace neither of them had known in years. They laughed easily, worked seamlessly, moved like 2 halves of a story that had been waiting for the right page. Their love didn't happen in a rush. It grew, quietly, patiently, until one day it was something they couldn't ignore. And then came the moment. In the fall of 1947, while performing at a rodeo in Chicago, Roy sat on trigger, looked at Dale with that soft, certain ease he carried, and told her they should get married. No over-the-top speech, no grand performance, just a simple, life-altering invitation minutes before they were supposed to ride out in front of a roaring crowd. She said yes. They set the date for New Year's Eve. The world buzzed with wild predictions. Trigger would be the best man. Dale would float down the aisle in a glittering red cowgirl gown, and the whole ceremony would look like a scene straight out of one of their movies. But the truth was far quieter, far more intimate. They married at a ranch in Oklahoma, the same place they were filming their 17th movie, Home in Oklahoma. No spectacle, no staged magic. Just 2 people choosing each other after surviving lives that had tested them at every turn. And when news spread, hearts broke everywhere. For years, women wrote letters confessing they had believed Roy would someday ride up to their doorstep on trigger and sweep them into a fairy tale. But Dale was the one who held his heart, and she held it for the rest of his life. From the moment they married, their names fused. You couldn't say one without thinking of the other. They became the heartbeat of American westerns. 29 films, more than 200 albums, endless appearances, and a kind of presence that made rooms go still when they walked in. They weren't acting. They weren't pretending. What people saw on screen was the same tenderness they carried in private. Together, they loved children fiercely. They visited hospitals, orphanages, and places where hope was thin and spirits were tired. They showed up not as stars, but as 2 people who understood pain and believed in lifting others out of it. They brought that same compassion into their home. 9 children, a house full of laughter, chaos, love, and heartbreak. Because life didn't spare them. 3 of their children died young, losses that could have shattered anyone. But instead of pulling apart, those tragedies tightened the knot between them. Their faith held them. Their love steadied them. And through every joy and every wound, they walked side by side, never once letting go. More than 75 years later, their names are still spoken like a single truth. Say Roy Rogers, and Dale Evans rises with him. Say Dale, and Roy's shadow follows. Two lives that had been battered long before they ever met somehow found refuge in each other. They had both been married before. They had both crawled through heartbreak. But when they found one another, it stuck. Not because Hollywood wanted it, but because their souls did. Their story didn't just mold a generation. It gave people something to believe in. A reminder that after loss, after grief, after every disappointment life throws at you, love can still walk in quietly and simply and save you. The many tragedies of Dale Evans' life. The many tragedies of Dale Evans' life didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, each one heavier than the last, each one carving a deeper mark into a woman the world had only ever seen smiling beneath a cowgirl hat. By the time she married Roy Rogers on New Year's Eve of 1947, Dale had already survived more heartbreak than most people face in a lifetime. And yet, standing there at the Flying L Ranch in Davis, Oklahoma, she carried hope in her eyes again. She hoped that this time life would finally let her breathe. Their marriage wasn't a fairy tale, it was something sturdier. Two people who had been bruised by life found a home in each other, a place where they didn't have to pretend. It was her fourth marriage and his third, but it was the one that lasted. From the moment they joined hands in 1947 until Roy took his final breath in 1998. They became a team in every sense, on screen and off, raising their children in a house filled with music, faith, and the kind of love that grows deeper the more it's tested. Not long after the wedding, Dale finally laid her long-held secret to rest. She stopped pretending that her son Tommy was her younger brother. The truth was out, and she no longer had to hide the part of her life that had once been used against her. Roy embraced that truth. He embraced her. And together, they built a family that blended past pain with new beginnings. Roy brought 3 children into their marriage: Cheryl, Linda, and Dusty. Together, Roy and Dale added another life to the home, a daughter named Robin Elizabeth, born in 1950. She was their miracle, the child they prayed for and the child they lost far too soon. Robin lived less than 2 years. Complications from Down syndrome stole her from their arms before she had the chance to grow into her own light. That loss broke something open inside Dale, but it also pushed her to fight for the children the world refused to understand. She poured her grief into her writing, turning raw pain into a voice of compassion and truth. Her book, Angel Unaware, didn't just honor Robin. It forced people to see children with disabilities through a lens of dignity, love, and humanity. And from that point forward, Dale's influence stretched far beyond Hollywood. Her name became part of the movement that changed how society embraced children like Robin. She kept writing, kept speaking, kept working, carrying the message she wished someone had carried to her. She and Roy continued building their family, welcoming 4 more children through adoption: Mimi, Dodie, Sandy, and Debbie. Their home overflowed with life, laughter, and the hope that maybe, finally, the worst was behind them. But tragedy wasn't finished with Dale Evans. In 1964, 12-year-old Debbie died in a bus accident. One moment she was on her way to camp, and the next, Dale and Roy were standing in the wreckage of another unthinkable loss. Before they could fully heal, another blow struck. Their son, John David, only 18, died while serving overseas in Germany. 2 children gone within a few years. Grief could have crushed their marriage. Instead, it welded them together. They left the noise of the big city behind and bought a 67-acre ranch in Apple Valley, California. The Double R Bar Ranch. That land became their refuge, their shield, the place where they tried to hold on to peace after burying so much pain. It would be the home they clung to for the rest of their lives. And then came the list Dale could never outrun. In the summer of 1998, congestive heart failure took Roy from her. He died at their ranch, surrounded by the life they built together, at 86 years old. The man the world adored, the man Dale loved beyond reason, was gone. His death hollowed her out. It wasn't just grief. It was the unraveling of a soul that had already endured more sorrow than any one heart should have to carry. Roy had once called her his guiding star, the woman who steadied him when life tried to knock him down. But after he was gone, Dale was the one stumbling through the dark, clutching memories that hurt as much as they healed. Their love had been a lifetime, a real, weathered, unshakable love, and losing it broke her in a way she never recovered from. Still, she wasn't alone. Their surviving children surrounded her, carrying her through the ache, reminding her that not all of life had been loss. Some of it had been joy, laughter, purpose, and legacy. Cheryl, the daughter they'd adopted back in 1941, stepped into the work Dale had championed, pouring her heart into advocacy and child welfare, picking up her mother's torch and running with it. But even with love around her, Dale's heartbreak never eased. She spent the next 2.5 years grieving the man who had been her partner in every sense. Her soul stayed tethered to him, as if she were waiting for the moment she could finally follow. That moment came on February 7, 2001. She had held on as long as she could, but in the end, grief carried her to the place she had been moving toward ever since Roy took his final breath. The heartbreaking death of Dale Evans. Dale Evans spent her final years quietly at the ranch she once shared with Roy Rogers, the man she loved for more than half her life. By the time she reached 88, her body had grown tired, and the long string of personal losses she carried had settled into her in a way that never fully let her heal. On February 7, 2001, at her home in the high desert east of Los Angeles, Dale died of congestive heart failure. It was a soft ending, the kind that comes after a lifetime of pushing through more sorrow than most people ever face. She had already lived through the deaths of several of her children. She had already buried Roy 3 years earlier, in 1998, after heart failure took him at their ranch in Apple Valley. His loss changed something in her. She never pretended otherwise. The silence he left behind was something she never managed to shake. Even surrounded by her surviving children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Dale carried a quiet sadness that never fully lifted. The woman once known as the Queen of the West, the same woman who sang Happy Trails with a smile that made America feel safe, spent her last years with a heart still aching from the absence of the partner she had walked through everything with. When she passed, it wasn't sudden. It was simply the moment her body could no longer keep going. After decades of music, movies, loss, and faith, Dale Evans slipped away in the place she felt most at home. Her death closed the final page on a life marked by deep love and deep pain. And while she left behind shelves of music, books, and memories treasured by generations, the truth is simple. Dale Evans died with a heart that had broken long before her body did. Were you a fan of Dale Evans's songs? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.